you're in the right place. Dr. Chris Wusterhausen has been in your shoes, and he's done the work and can show you how you can turn things around. In this podcast, he'll share his personal stories and advice on how to create the life you want for yourself as a provider and as a business person. You'll learn how to reclaim your life, your time, your energy, and most of all, reclaim the dream you had when you started your journey to become a doctor. Welcome to the Dr. Chris podcast. All right, welcome back. This is another conversation with Dr. Chris. Dr. Chris is the owner of the Research Clinic. He's a provider that provides age management medicine. We were just discussing this. And so when we think about the folks that are listening to this conversation or watching this conversation, I mean, here's where we are. We're either patients that want to be proactive in our health. We want to take ownership of our health. But that means that we need a provider that's aligned with us, that's thinking like that, that's not offended by discussing all the other options that maybe insurance doesn't let you color outside of the lines. And so if you're a physician, you've got patients that are asking you questions that insurance is not going to approve. So what do? It's like, I got a lot of people to see today. I need to hustle, so I don't have time to explore these things. And it's frustrating. And we're talking about going from an insurance directed model to more of a custom medicine model, if you will. It's a way of exploring what's better for the patient, what's better for the physician. And so, Dr. Chris, you started a journey where this was bouncing around in your head. You were feeling like this is not what I really signed up for. You were trying to make it within a system that was set up to like a treadmill. It seems like I wasn't there, but it seems like when I hear you talk about it, it's like a treadmill. You got to go faster and faster. You got to make the insurance happy. You got to stay within this lane or it's not. But you were like unhealthy yourself. You were seeing patients that you really couldn't impact with their health. And this caused this presented in a hero's journey, presented a call to action that you probably resisted for a while. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, it was always, and we've discussed it a little bit before. I mean, it was first of all, it was a long journey. It was a slow journey, making the change because, like I think a lot of professionals, I have a hard time making major decisions and really dramatically changing my life because there is some comfort in routines. And then you have this allegiance to your patients because, gosh, I know that if I change to this model, especially, I don't think anyone can change from as dramatically different models as what I had because I was in a traditional county-based medicine system. 95% of my patients were Medicare, Medicaid, or no pays because they were being subsidized by the county. It's not like I was in a practice in, maybe downtown Dallas where, the average income of every patient was 150,000 plus. I mean, I had a few of those patients, but not many. So my dilemma was a little bit different than some because a lot of providers have their own practices, have a very diverse practice and their economic patients, making this change a little bit more or a little less scary, maybe is the correct term. But take that out of it. I still, even though that I didn't always feel like I was doing the most for my patients because of the system that I was stuck in, I still was doing a lot for those patients in their eyes. And, and I guess as I look back, I was helping them. I just always felt like I could help them more. And then what really pushed me towards the edge of changing my practice is when I realized the mental fatigue and the physical burden that I was taking upon myself, realizing that, I've got kids, I've got a wife, I don't want to check out of this world too early. I mean, we're all going out of it, but I wanted to be, I always joke, but most doctors don't age very well. You really look at them and it's like, most of these doctors at 60, 65, 70, they look like they're 70, 75, 80. Um, and it's because of the life that they've had to live being a physician. I was talking to another physician this weekend, and we were just, he's same age. We're both 49 years old, and just talking about the burden, and he's still in that traditional model of just how much stress it is to keep that going, taking care of your patients, seeing 30 plus. He sees around 40 patients a day. Just trying to keep that going with the paperwork and everything else. And at the end of the day, just I always go back to, I had about 12 minutes per patient. That's about the allotted time that I had. If you were a new patient, I had about double that. So about 24 minutes. Um, most of these patients I'd been seeing for years, there's got to be some form of pleasantries when you enter the room. Hey, how's it going? How's the baby? How's the wife? So now I've got about 9 minutes, after we do 2 or 3 minutes of catching up, because you can't just walk in and say, we got to get to work here. There's a little bit of pleasantries. And I just didn't feel like I was doing a very good job for my patients in that amount of time. So then you make the decision, do I spend more time on my patients, get minimal reimbursement for that, because you really aren't getting a whole lot more per visit for spending an extra 10, 15 minutes with them? Or do I just see the same amount of patients, but I'm just further behind? Now I'm finishing at 6:37. Now the facility's mad at you because you're keeping your employees on overtime. Office managers mad at you. Patients are mad because they're waiting. It just was a no-win situation. But ultimately what led to my change was myself. I just realized I can't mentally do this for another 20 years. I literally, like, I think I've told you on one of the podcasts, I started seriously considering a complete job change, an occupation change. That's how, but I was like, I love medicine. I don't want to give up medicine. I just realized I couldn't do that form of medicine. I could never see myself going back to that model. I'd figure something out before doing that. And I know a lot of providers are in that same situation. And as we talked about, sometimes patients are going to be put in situations where their provider out of nowhere comes and says, you know what, I'm changing models. And then patients have to decide, do I go with this new model? Do I find another provider? But I love this provider. I've been with them for 15 years and they're good to me. I know that's a big debate because more physicians or more providers are changing to this more cash for service model. There's pros and cons for both sides of the fence, but I firmly believe the pros outweigh the cons if, of course, a patient can fit it into their budget. Obviously there's patients that just, no matter what the budget is, they can't fit that in there. But I've been surprised at how many patients can fit it into their budget, who are able to find the value in the program.
Let's talk about what the cons are real quick. Maybe a short list of cons from a physician's point of view.
Well, so, I think that most providers who are looking at this probably have some form of a stable practice. And they're always, I think that there's a few ways to do this. And this is what I always talk to my patients. You can do a slow conversion. You can do like one of my friends did. He literally sold his practice and opened up 6 months later with 0 patients with a brand new, he calls it a functional medicine model, age management, functional medicine. We're really kind of saying the same thing, different terms for kind of the same thing. So he opened up that model. You can do, so some providers will kind of separate their facilities to where maybe certain half days of the week they do more like what we do, and then certain days of the week they do their traditional practice. You have to be careful with insurances. That's not, we're not lawyers. You just have to be real careful with that. I had 2 separate offices. So like 3 days a week. And that's how I started it slowly. I actually started 1 day a week. I worked for the county. I was able to basically redo my contract where they gave me a day off a week, and I went and I did my own thing at a completely different address in town, and started 1 day a week and just slowly built it up. And so I did the extremely conservative model that took me a few years, probably could have done it faster if I'd, I always think if your hands held to the stove, a lot of times you figure out how to make things work a little faster versus having, 3 or 4 safety nets. But I'm more of a safety net kind of guy. I'm just not the balls to the wall type personality. I growing up in a family where money was a problem, I've always been more of that kind of a person. And I think you have to know what your personality is. So the cons really become, I think, financial. There's obviously going to be most likely some form of expense required. And are you starting from zero? Do you, no one's going to go to this cash model and have built-in ready to go patients unless they've really started prepping their patients for it for months. So I think that's the biggest thing. Every physician is in the back of their head going to go, do I go to this model and in 6 months I have no patients? And I built this traditional practice that I can't stand, but it's there and it's making money and it's paying my bills. If I switch over to this model, is there a chance that I lose it all? And, I've lost my traditional model, it's gone, or it's at least disassembled. And now I've gone over to this thing and it doesn't work. And I think it's always the biggest barrier. Every single time I talk to a provider, it always comes back to fear of finances, or somebody that sold their practice, or maybe they semi-retired and they're kind of doing just basic kind of like temporary work. And they've lost their footing in their community and they really are starting from scratch. Kind of like what we're going to do in Nashville. We're going to start from scratch. That's not the optimal way to do things, but sometimes that's what you have to do. So I would say all the cons, and then just breaking habits, just maybe not realizing that the other side of the fence is greener in this case, and just because you haven't done it before. So I was lucky enough that I was able to work. I think I've told part of my journey was I first started with age management medicine with a company called Synergenics. And I was able to work for them a half a day a week. I had a half a day off at my other one. So that's the half day that I worked for Synergenics. And I did that for a couple of years. And I was able to really dip my toe into that side of medicine and learn that side of medicine and feel comfortable that I knew what I was going to do. The other con is maybe realizing you're going to have to re-educate yourself. I think a lot of traditional providers, and I've told this about myself, I really kind of got in a rut where, I read a little bit, I went to a few drug rep dinners, but I wasn't immersed into continuing my education like I probably should have. I got kind of literal and figuratively fat and happy of just, I've got this figured out because I was seeing the same things every day. And okay, here's the same treatment every day. I think I've told you most doctors dole out the same 50, 60 medicines over and over and over because they get real comfortable. They'll use others, don't get me wrong, but most on a day-to-day basis, 50, 60 medications they're really working from versus the thousands that are out there. So I think that's pretty much on the con side of the switch for providers.
And so let's talk about the pros. What are some of the things that maybe you don't know about that are just financial?
Yeah. So if we're speaking from it strictly on a provider basis, I tell doctors that I talk to, my practice used to be a high volume, low yield practice. I had to see a lot of patients in order to make a living to keep the practice going. We had 4 providers. Whenever I started with 2 providers, we ended with, 5 providers, including myself. And no, 4. I'm right. I was wrong. 4 providers total, 2 when I started, 25 employees, give or take, to keep 4 providers going. I tell providers, when you go to this model, I now have 2 providers with, 3 to 5 employees, because so much of what our employees at a traditional practice is billing the insurance, collecting the money, getting the prior auths done. When you lose the need for all of that stuff, your overhead comes down so much. And that's one of the things I try to tell my providers that I talk to is, you don't understand how much your overhead is just going to keep the train moving forward. our overhead we're lucky, especially where we live in Texas. Even real estate, even though it's getting more expensive, is still very affordable compared to, Florida and California and these states. But, my biggest overhead is just my building, and I own it. And that's great because, it's part of my retirement plan. The actual payroll and mortgage. I mean, other than that, the overhead is extremely low compared to the normal model. So overhead goes tremendously down. So now I have a high yield, low volume practice. So I went from high volume, low yield to the exact opposite. I tell providers, I try to keep my patient load between 10 to 15 a day, about a third to half of what I was prior. Some days are less, some days are more. I'm able to spend time with my patients. The self-satisfaction, knowing that I'm changing my patients' lives, to me is well worth it, even if there's no more money in it. The stress and strain on the provider's mind and body, I think, is probably the biggest thing. The fact that I could do what I do, I could do a generous portion of what I do and not even be in my office if I chose to. I mean, I could be in Cabo if I chose to, and as long as I've got a computer and a microphone and and some internet, I could do a lot of what I do from other places, and that's just not feasible in a traditional medicine model. So if I've never had this pleasure, but if I'm like, hey, I want to go to Cabo for 2 weeks, I could, for the most part, as long as I've got a nurse practitioner back here in the office, I could pull that off. So just the flexibility of my schedule, the lower overhead, the less stress and strain on myself. And then at the end of the day, the biggest thing is the patient's outcomes are just tremendously better. I think that's pretty much what the ledger is on the pro side of things.
Okay, so let's do this. Let's compare and contrast pre Dr. Kris health in that high stress, low yield situation, and post. What does that look like now? How do you feel in your situation?
Well,
Personal.
so if we're gonna go like personal stuff, I'm 49. When I started this conversion, I was 34. Like I said, I've been a slow converter. Okay. And actually I worked for Synergenics for a couple of years, and then we started this practice about 12 years ago. I always tell everybody when I started this, I was 35 to 36% body fat. I range now it's a little higher than I would like right now. It's about 16. So I've more than cut my body fat in half in that amount of time. All of my laboratory markers are better. My blood pressure is better. I take minimal medications. I can run faster and lift more than I could when I was 34 years old. And what do I attribute all that to? Because now I have time to concentrate on my health and wellness. Are there still times that I venture away from that? Of course there is, but that's just life. No matter what field of medicine you're in, there's always going to be weeks and months that are, the pandemic. We're very blessed. The pandemic was actually crazy around here because, as I've told you, I found that a lot of my local traditional physicians weren't really helping their patients a whole lot early on in the pandemic. These patients were kind of left scrambling, like they had limited hours, and, we're kind of a traditional town that's not real advanced, I would say, technologically. And, we saw it as an opportunity, like, great, this is a way to add business. I'm here to work. Let's do this. Lord knows I'm here to help the people in my community. And so it's actually been kind of weird. We're not quite as hectic these days. And I was kind of thinking about that over the last couple of weeks. And I think I've realized what it is the pandemic is, at least for now, kind of slowing down again. And I think it's kind of having this little bit of a counter effect of hopefully they're not going to take it too far of, avoiding their own health. But I think people are kind of exhaling just a little bit now with COVID actually having very nice decreases over the last month nationally. Of course, I've aged 15 years. I can't say that I haven't, but I feel very comfortable that at 49, I don't think that I'm in much worse shape than I was at 34. And in many ways, I'm absolutely in better physical shape. Mentally, I study more now than I probably did since medical school. Certainly did more in medical school because that's what you do all day long. But I'm constantly reading things. Heck, just these podcasts keep me going. I'm now teaching other providers, which has been a big, huge help keeping me moving forward. And probably the biggest thing I like about my practice now is just me learning. I tell all of my patients, I may tell you something different in 6 months because I may learn something new. It's not that what I told you was wrong. I just found something new that I think is better. And I think my patients really enjoy that. I really do. I think they like the fact that they feel like they have a provider who is truly trying to learn all the new stuff. Sometimes my patients bring me in new stuff. Heck, I've got a folder sitting in a chair of a patient that brung in a bunch of stuff that they've printed off they want me to look at, which I think that's awesome. I love looking, whether I agree with it or not. I just love the fact that somebody's looking at their own health and hopefully not on Facebook only for their health guidance. So anyway.
So it's like, it feels like when I listen to it on this end, as a physician, you were in a profession that was controlling you. And part of the transformation is now that you feel that you're driving more, you have the luxury. I think it's a part of reducing your stress is when you feel like you have a say-so in what your time is spent on and where you're investing in your future, as opposed to maybe insurance dictating what you do, maybe other forces that aren't aligned with good health.
Yeah, and doesn't isn't that what we're all looking for at the end of the day? No matter if you're an employee or an employer, you want to know that your voice is being heard, that you have some control over what you're doing, if you're doing a good job. And most providers will tell you, if they're being honest, that they don't work. They work for the insurance companies. The insurance companies tell us what we're going to do, how much we're going to get paid. If you don't like it, then don't take it, but you won't have enough patients to exist. We're literally still talking about, like with Medicare, cuts. They haven't even given enough pay cuts for doctors right now. That's a big debate if you look it up right now. And Medicare hasn't even keeping up with inflation over the last 20 years, but yet they're looking at cutting their reimbursements even more to providers and expecting good providers, busy providers to take that. So if let's just say you're a Medicare patient, you're now 65 and you're Medicare and you've worked your whole life, used to have Blue Cross Blue Shield. Now you're forced to go into the Medicare system because Medicare always becomes primary, and even if you still have commercial, it goes secondary once you have Medicare. You may lose your provider just because of that, because your provider says, you know what, I'm not concierge, but I won't take Medicare because it just doesn't pay me enough. And because for the most people, it doesn't. It's a really difficult thing to do if you're in a practice where I can see all day long United Healthcare, whatever, and get reimbursed at higher rates. Why would you take Medicare patients? Unless you're literally doing it out of the kindness of your heart. And I think all providers start there, but then eventually the accountant comes to you and says, what the hell, you're turning away patients that pay you 30% more, and they're easier patients because they're younger. Unfortunately, as we get older, most of us have more medical problems. So your Medicare patients are generally your more complicated, more time consuming patients. And oh, by the way, you're getting paid less. So, these are dilemmas that many patients don't realize that doctors go through, because somehow doctors are not seen as businessmen and women. They're seen as, you're here to take care of me no matter what you get paid. And because I think there's this general thought that doctors, are all multi-millionaires. They all bring home, $1 million a year net, which is so far from the truth. And no one puts into the equation how much they sacrifice to actually get to the point to even be able to draw a decent paycheck. Like I try to sometimes if I get patients like that back in the day, I would say, I graduated from college and then I had 7 more years of education. 4 of those I paid to go. 3, I barely made anything. If you looked at the per hour wage, it's well below minimum wage. And so now here I am at 30 years old, starting to finally make a paycheck, where the guy who went to college, or girl, has been making a decent paycheck since 22. That's nearly a decade gap to make up of revenue. Plus, I paid for medical school during that. And if you really look at it, don't I literally, my daughter is 15, about to be 16, and she's flirting with the idea of being a doctor. And I say, honey, please only become a doctor if you truly, truly love it. Because if it's a business decision, you could make much better business decisions than becoming a provider. But at least in this model, we're putting the control back in the hands of the provider. They can charge what they want. They can charge little. They can charge a lot, depending on what they can get. That's up to you. Your patients either will or won't pay it. You still got to provide value for service. It's great to say I'm going to charge cash and I'm going to put blank on myself. You still got to realize it's a competitive market, and you've got to show value there. But I think we're all just trying to look. We all want to feel wanted. We all want to feel like we've got to say. We all want to feel, just appreciated at the end of the day. And I truly feel like my patients before appreciated me too. I don't want to make it sound like they didn't. I just knew I was getting to the point where I was no longer a big help to them anymore, because of how mentally fried I was. I was just getting through days, probably for the last year and a half. I mean, if I'm being totally honest, that's the way it was.
So let's compare and contrast, maybe from the patient's point of view, how you perceive it. I'm thinking of my experiences with you and previous general practitioner doctors, right? And it's very contrasting. From your perspective, what does that look like now?
Proactive versus reactive medicine is the biggest thing I can say. I believe the traditional model is reactive medicine, where it looks like a duck, it quacks like a duck, it must be a duck, so let's treat it as a duck, okay? Versus it's got, the easiest thing to discuss is like diabetes, okay? Steve, your A1C finally, the 90-day blood sugar test is finally in diabetic range. We kind of talked about it the last couple of years about how it was trending up. I kind of told you to maybe exercise a little more, maybe to eat a little better foods for you. I spent about 2 minutes discussing it with you, and well, now you're fully diabetic, and now we've got to put these 3, 4, 5 medicines on board. And because I'm not going to give you a chance to lose the weight and actually do better, because I ain't got time for that. I actually told you, American Diabetes Association doesn't even have it as part of the protocol for treatment of diabetes anymore. Nutritional counseling, it's gone. It's medications. And so, in the average patient has been a diabetic for 5 years upon diagnosis, because of just, so many patients either don't go, or the doctor doesn't run the right test, or whatever. I think it's the fault of everybody. It's not just the provider's fault. It's everybody's fault. Versus now, when I get a patient in and I can just look at them, and I always say the eyeball test is really important. When you get somebody that doesn't look healthy, they're probably not. And I don't care what their basic labs say, oh, fine, their cholesterol's okay, and their red blood cells are fine. We got to dig deeper, because if they're 40, 55, 60, 70 pounds overweight, I guarantee I can dig deep enough to finally convince them that this is not okay. And really, and if their labs are good, then that's great. Then that means I've actually got an opportunity here to take a couple of years to slowly get them back in shape. Like I was telling one of my physician's family members the other day that I was seeing, I kind of like when I see labs that are abnormal, but not crazy abnormal, because it gives me fuel for my convincing them that we need to make a change. Sometimes those hardest patients can be the ones that are overweight, and you can tell it's coming, but their labs are actually okay. It's like, damn, that kind of backfired on me, but I still got ways to convince them that, well, that's great today. But I have the time to actually sit with these patients. I can spend an hour with a patient. I tell patients we usually start at an hour and then we go down to 30 minutes, and maybe we get to where we're at 15 minutes again, but I try to book them for 30 minutes so that we can really get to the root of what's going on with them. It just, those extra few minutes make such a difference with patients. to realize a patient's coming in and we're not just going to talk about, let's change this prescription to this and let's change that prescription to that. It's like, what you've been eating the last week and a half. Tell me your eating cycles. You've been fasting. How much you've been fasting? How's the exercise going? What are you doing with exercise? These are questions they don't usually get asked at their doctor's appointment. They just don't. Their trainer maybe asks them if they have one, but not their doctors. Why is that? Doctors don't have time. That's the main thing. And most doctors don't know what questions to ask. I mean, I hate to say it. They don't know what to ask. Most doctors aren't actively in the gym themselves. Doctors aren't, I always try to tell my patients, I'm no different than you are. Now, you're a healthier patient, so you and we relate in that way, okay? I find that, what's that saying, like your dog looks like you or something like that? I feel like patients are like you too, like you attract patients in some weird way. And if you're a guy that's overweight, you don't go to the gym, you're probably going to end up with a practice that kind of looks the same. If you're a healthier doc and you really stay healthy, you're going to find that your practice kind of morphs into that as well. I have new providers that come to my office like, wow, your practice really seems healthy. And it's like, yeah, because I kind of attract those patients. They want to go to a doctor that they can associate with, like he or she has the same likes and dislikes as I do. And from looking at it from the patient side, this can be a huge dilemma for patients. Do I follow my doctor? And I was lucky enough that I had more patients follow me than I thought I would. I really didn't know if anybody would. And I was surprised at how many patients that didn't have high paying occupations who chose to follow me. They saw the value in what I offered them. And whenever I explained to them the process and how it works, they understood it. They got it. Not everybody, obviously, but a decent number. Just the wait time in your doctor's office. I promised my patients, unless all hell broke loose, I'm going to get you in on time and I'm going to get you out on time so that that, because your time is just as valuable as my time. I don't believe in this, that my time is more valuable than your time. And I think it's disrespectful, but it's unfortunate the way it works in a traditional medicine's office. You had a 10 o'clock appointment, you get seen at 12:15. I mean, you basically waste a half a day trying to get your 20-minute visit in or 15-minute visit. So, if time really matters to you, I think that's a really big advantage, knowing that, as I always joke, you're not going to sit in my waiting room these days with 20 sick, crying, screaming kids. And you came to my office healthy and you left with the flu, because all these kids sneezing and coughing everywhere. We have a big office. If somebody is sick, they go right to a room. We disinfect that room when they're gone and we close it down for a little while. We're really conscious of making sure our patients don't, pass on diseases to each other. But just, do you want to get better? Do you want to actually get healthier? Because this thought that as we age, we have to get sicker, I just don't believe in that. I don't believe that's the way it has to be. I feel very comfortably telling my patients that I am healthier at 49 than I was at 34. Have I aged? Yes, I have aged. Yes, when I work out, muscles maybe hurt a little more at times. And yes, I've got a few more chronic aches and pains, but actually I'd probably say less overall when I was overweight. You don't have to be that way. I see patients not patients. I see people out in the community all the time, and I'm like, dang, that guy's my age. They're 50, but they look 65. And I'm just like, man, it doesn't have to be that way. We don't have to let the truck get completely beat up before we decide to, do some maintenance. And so it's, I just try to tell my patients, the sooner we get on this, the better we'll do. Anyway, that's kind of a long answer to your question, but that's kind of that's how I feel about it.
I'm listening to this and it feels like it's a similar situation from a patient's point of view. Steve, this is just what you're going to get. We could probably figure out more. We could probably take more time and we could probably be more proactive. But in the traditional practice, yeah, I don't really have any control. I'm just going to get these few medicines are what I get to choose from or get prescribed to me because the doctor's got his hit list. I mean, his regular hit list.
Yeah, his comfort list. Yeah.
Yeah. Or hers. And then And so it's like I'm going from that is like, this is what you're going to get. You don't really have any control. Sorry about you, but you're just going to get sick. You're going to be diabetic and you're going to have these other things. So these are the medicines that we project you're going to be taking here over time. Two, hey, let's sit down and take control. Let's work together on a plan. You have options. There are things that you can consider that you don't know about. One of those, what really blew me away was like peptides. I didn't realize that these were available, that your body makes these things, and you're just going to have these signaling agents that are going to go tell your body, use this to heal faster. I didn't know that these were options until I met you.
Right. Yeah. And, going back to your first model, the traditional model, patients don't know that there is a different way of doing it many times. It's not even like the doctor, like, here's the way. I think that we're so trained that the provider doesn't realize there's another option and the patient doesn't realize there's another option. It's just the way it is. It's like, I don't know, in November, it gets cold. It's just the way it is. And they think it's the only way to do medicine. And why is this type of medicine the fastest growing area of medicine? Well, because more providers are figuring it out. But when you still look at how many there are versus how many doctors, it's still a very small number that are doing this. It's gaining steam because, the newer generation of physicians, from everything I've read, are not as interested in working as hard as the older generation of physicians. And as much as my old crotchety side wants to be like, like, what the hell, you need to go out and work 60 hours a week too, and take call every night. I also get it. I really do. They're probably the smarter of the bunch because they're realizing from the beginning, hey, I realize that if I work this many hours a week, what's going to be the outcome, and mentally, and I actually want to have a home life and a family and enjoy life. The problem is, for many providers in a traditional model, working those few hours doesn't equal making typically enough revenue to kind of live the lifestyle that they're looking at. Because I think sometimes if providers knew what the average salary is for some of these different specialties, they might be surprised that it's a lot lower than what they think it is. So that's the downfall. Some new providers are going straight into this model. It's just boom, residency and into this model, which can be really cool. But anyway, so yeah, it's big decisions for both sides of the fence, no doubt.
Well, it's the responsibilities, and it's also in this relationship, patient provider relationship, where it's going to be this functional medicine, this cellular medicine, we have options, more options than you knew, but it requires that you take some time and that you're going to invest in some education. You're going to invest in changing your lifestyle. It's more than just taking a pill once a day. You're moving from the option of, here you go, here's a pill you're going to take once a day from now on top of your other. Let's make sure there's no contradicting, side effects. To, hey, you're good.
If I could stop you there. Many times they don't even do that, but go ahead. I can't tell how many times I see people like, you can't take those things together. Oh, I don't know. Because remember how we talked about how specialists in primary cares, and one specialist prescribes something, another specialist prescribes something else, and they're not taking the time many times to make sure these things. You have to rely on your pharmacist most of the time to actually point out, like, oh crap, there's a contraindication here. So anyway, I didn't mean to stop you, but even that sometimes doesn't even happen. But go ahead.
Yeah, but it's like, as a physician and as a patient, or as a provider and a patient, it's like I'm signing up to change my lifestyle in some ways. That means I'm going to exercise different. I'm going to eat different. I'm going to not eat in a certain way different, right? And so it means I have to change how I see myself, my identity. Some of the activities I do, maybe, sitting around and watching football games all weekend, is not good for my health. So I have to kind of change. Am I going to be active? Am I going to tell Fred I'm not going to join him over at his house again, and we're going to have beer and potato chips and watch the game again, right?
Yeah.
So there's these changes of how you see yourself, both as a physician and as a patient.
And I do think there's value to paying for something, it for most, it keeps us, it's kind of like bringing patients back. It's, knowing that accountability, there's an accountability to that. Like, oh my gosh, I got to go in. I need to show some success, or, I paid for this out of my own pocket. Maybe this is a vacation that I normally would have done, but instead I use this money on this, and I better get my money's worth out of it. I think that's a big aspect of it too. I think I'd use the analogy to you. Sometimes patients get real stuck on using their insurance, and luckily in our area of Texas, we have so many patients that are self-employed, and they go out and they buy, I have it as well, basically the worst commercial insurance that covers you for catastrophe. I call it catastrophic insurance. It's not paying for jack squat unless somebody's nearly dead, and God forbid you ever have to use it, but it's there to keep you from going bankrupt if something horrible happens. So that's kind of what I look for in my patients that realize if they go to the traditional doctor, they're really paying out of pocket anyway because of high deductibles. Why not pay maybe twice as much a year, but I'm getting so much more value. I'm getting 10 times the value for twice as much a year. I think when they look at it that way, they absolutely see the advantage. And then so many of my patients just say, Doc, I love what you do and everything, but what I love most is just the fact that I know my 30-minute visit is 30 minutes. I'm not waiting for an hour and a half and then 30 minutes, and now it's 2 hours, and I lost 2 hours of productivity. Heck, now my patients can stay at their office if they want to, and we'll just do it via Zoom, if I don't have to physically touch them during the visit. Lots of advantages because I think we all understand the value of time, which is just as important as anything else. My time and the patient's time. So, I'm never going to claim that I'm not behind, but it's rare. And if it is, it's no more than 10, 15 minutes versus, gosh, I used to be, the chest pain patient at 10 o'clock in the morning, and you were with them for 45 minutes to an hour and your whole day was screwed. You just never, I can't tell you how many days there was no lunch. It was literally like I finished my morning and she's like, your first of the afternoon is in room 1, and poof, off you go to that. Then you get done at 5:36 and you realize you've got a mountain of paperwork. You've got hour and a half to 2 hours of paperwork to finish before you get home. I mean, 7:30, 8 o'clock. It wasn't like that every day, but I mean, I never got out of the office. I was always in the office by 7:30 and never got out before 6. I mean, it just didn't happen. Um, Now I can keep up on my charts. I usually get started by 8:39 and I'm out of here by 5 most days. But when I do stay, it's because I want to. I'm actually like, oh, let me read an article, or because, I'm like most guys, when I go home, it's forget about it, kids, life. So I'll stick around here an extra hour or so when all the employees leave. So I get an hour of education time, but I want to be here. It's not work at that point.
So would you say that this has afforded you a way to be more present in your family time?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know that because of how much I travel, my kids might disagree with me. I don't know that I have more time for my family. I never thought that I didn't have enough time for my family. The biggest difference is I'm present. I can actually be an engaged dad, and one of the simple things, I can go to their functions, during the day. If I know in advance, I can block out 30 minutes. I couldn't do that in my own practice. By the time I drove to their thing, it was an hour and a half round trip, and I just didn't have an hour and a half in my schedule to give. I know these are things that traditional practitioners deal with on a daily basis. They don't even have a couple hours to go to their kids, assembly or whatever at school twice a year. I mean, it's really a problem for these docs.
It's been excellent. I think this is a great series that we're doing here. And I think that, from a patient's point of view, that to learn that there are things that I can consider. There are people, doctors, physicians, that are providers that would actually want to participate and spend some time with me and do some deeper labs and help me understand how I can be better in my health relationship to myself, so to speak. And then as a as a business person, how a provider can start to look at this, that they have more options that they didn't consider, that they're not just a slave to an insurance company, that they actually can build a practice that they're proud of, that gives you the things that are fulfilling in life instead of like the frustrating disappointments that I didn't know I signed up for this.
Yeah, no doubt. I agree with everything you just said, and thank you. Those are very kind. But hopefully, and we haven't even got into deep, what we actually do and the differences with our practice than maybe other, because every true cash practice or concierge medicine practice or boutique medicine, whatever, we're still trying to figure out those terms, I know, but everybody does different versions of different things. I don't claim to be great at everything, but we try to be really good at a few things. It's one thing that we've really tried to do over the last couple of years. We've talked about this many times, actually eliminate services, not add services. I woke up one day in this, and because I do want to do everything, that's my downfall. Like, oh yeah, I want to do everything, but you can't. You really need to be good at 4, 5, 6 things and just stay in your lane, and let other guys and girls do some of those other things, and they'll be really good at that, and you can refer to them. I look forward in this journey on this videos is just, kind of walking in even further down the path.
Yeah. So we've got some good topics. I took some notes. So, I can see other things that we talk about. What is the prepping your patients for transition in your practice? What would that look like? I could see us talking about re-education. What does that mean for you as a provider? What does that mean for your patients or you as a patient? There's some great topics here. So I'm excited about it. Dr. Kris, another good conversation. Appreciate you spending the time and investing in this. This is good.
Thank you, Steve. Appreciate you as well.
All right. And that's a wrap. Thanks for joining the Dr. Kris podcast. If you learned something today and you want to connect and get more information, visit our website, www.drkris.life, where you can find more great information or even schedule a time to learn how you can engage with Dr. Kris. Be sure to follow, like, share, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Dr. Kris podcast.